Out of the jungles of Cambodia, troops of the Khmer Rouge trudge into neighbouring Thailand, defeated followers of Cambodia's former ruler, Pol Pot. His regime was ousted at the start of the year by rival Cambodians with the help of invading Vietnamese forces. After months of bitter fighting, the Khmer Rouge have downed their weapons and sought refuge across the border. There's been fighting right across Southeast Asia, and that's created civilian suffering on a massive scale. Everywhere, people are on the move, either driven out or in search of a better life. It's all building up to one of the worst refugee problems in recent history, a problem that no one's yet found an answer to, and Thailand is right in the front line. Many of the stragglers across the border are sick and injured. They include former Khmer Rouge soldiers, Cambodian villagers and townspeople, and ethnic Chinese who are being forced out by Cambodia's Vietnam-backed regime of Heng Samrin. Many of the civilians have arrived with a minimum of belongings and bringing harrowing tales of daily life under successive regimes, each seeking to revenge itself on the supporters of its predecessor. Young and old, they decided they must get out, walking for weeks through the jungle towards Thailand, not even sure what they would find here. At this stage, they are grateful for a place to rest and for even the most meager of meals. But they keep on coming, swelling the numbers of homeless that have already reached staggering proportions. There are over 150,000 officially registered refugees in Thailand, and to make things worse, tens of thousands have crossed the border illegally. A refugee is becoming no longer an object of compassion, but someone nobody wants. Thailand is not alone. United Nations refugee agencies throughout Southeast Asia are caring for around 250,000 homeless. And the Secretary General of the UN, Kurt Waldheim, toured Southeast Asia last month to see the size of the in Thailand were on his itinerary. The UN has been worried ever since the stream of Indo-Chinese refugees That stream has now become such a flood that the world body has simply got to find other solutions besides administering relief on the spot. These people are classified as only temporary refugees. They are Khmer Rouge supporters clearing a fresh patch of jungle to grow their own food. They are waiting for the right moment to go back to their own country and fight the Vietnamese. At least that's what they maintain, and it gives them a certain status. The less assertive might find themselves separated from their families or even forced back to the border. Common complaints to Dr. Waldheim during his visit, and practices he insisted must stop. At this camp, it's a different scene. Life almost looks normal. Most of the people here at Wat Ko camp in Aranya Pradesh are ethnic Chinese from Cambodia. Contact with local Chinese merchants and traders. The whole camp is surrounded by vendors. Trade is brisk, indicating many of the Chinese managed to cross the border still with gold, jewels and other valuables. The Chinese were pushed out, but they were generally treated less severely than many Cambodians. In spite of everything, there's a market atmosphere about the place. Trade and information, too, about missing friends and relatives. And though the future is uncertain, the Chinese community spirit enables them to make light of their predicament. Not all retreating Khmer Rouge are allowed to stay. These soldiers are being transported back to the border, given their weapons back, and told to get on, fight in their own country. Whether they are back or not, the Thais certainly want to be rid of them. Officially, Vietnam. But Bangkok feels the last thing it wants is an expansionist-minded Vietnamese army along its border. The present situation in the border areas means that roadblocks are a common sight. The long frontier makes it impossible to keep a check on everyone coming across. But the Thais are hoping at least to prevent the refugees from passing deeper into the country. Those who are caught trying to do so can be classified as illegal immigrants and sent back into Cambodia without ceremony. There's often a sense of fraternity, though, between soldiers of different countries. A young Khmer Rouge soldier here, just 14 years of age, claims to have shot several Vietnamese in recent fighting. With a colleague, he also caught a tree animal, which they brought across the border, 100 meters or so away, to use as barter. After their brief visit and business completed, the two young Khmer Rouge went back to carry on their fight. The refugees flood into Thailand by sea as well as by land, from Vietnam as well as Cambodia. This boatload deliberately sank their vessel offshore, placing themselves in the hands of army patrols. The army's job is usually to force the boats out again, but the desperation of this group gave them no choice. Thai pirates are another constant threat to the boat people. They arrive with tales of being attacked on the high seas, the men murdered, the women raped, and all their valuables stolen. After their ordeals, they move off carrying everything they can down the road to another of Thailand's temporary camps. They already have the resigned air of refugees everywhere. Their fate now lies in the hands of strangers. All around Southeast Asia, about 250,000 refugees languish in United Nations-sponsored camps. But it's Hong Kong that's been the center of the flood of refugees in recent months. It's become the favored goal of the homeless who've taken to the high seas. These refugees are the most visible evidence of the troubles in Vietnam. They're arriving in Hong Kong in unprecedented numbers. Many of the crowded vessels sink during the dangerous journey across the South China Sea. Their human cargoes drown. Others, in difficulty and distress, are picked up by passing ships and freighters. There are also the notorious cases where professional refugee smugglers extract large sums of money from those who are desperate to leave. Many of these so-called boat people come into port without any money and no more than the clothes they're standing in. Many of the boats which do in fact make it to the shores of Hong Kong would not be considered seaworthy by most people's standards. For the refugees, though, it's a risk they're happy to take. So strong is their desire to leave Vietnam. But it's not just the safety of the boats that's appalling. So too are the conditions the refugees have to suffer while making their crossing. Hong Kong's the most obvious destination for refugees from northern Vietnam. It's one of the closest foreign ports, and the boats can stop for assistance in Chinese coastal villages along the way. Most of the refugees are ethnic Chinese. Some observers say there's a deliberate policy to eliminate the entire ethnic Chinese population in Vietnam. Even communities who lived there for 5 generations are being forced out. Each group has its own story to tell about how they came to Hong Kong.
No, it's my ship of my brother. He's a fisherman.
I see.
Yeah, we don't have nothing. We come in here, This unseaworthy because we live in Vietnam on 1 o'clock at night, and we put the baby in the ship first, then the people also go in after the baby. This for 5 minutes to leave.
And you come straight here?
Yes.
Very good time. You make very good progress.
Because my brother he is a fisherman, so we know in the sea, and we come from here.
So he knows how to come here, so he doesn't have to spend as much time at sea.
Yes. We have a fisherman of the Taipei. They give us the rice, oil, and some food to come in here. Then they show this paper for us. This is the paper from the fisherman at the Taipei.
And you wanted to come to Hong Kong, did you?
Yes, sir. We all my family just come to the place.
Is this all your family? Everyone on board the ship, your family?
Yes, sir.
How many people?
36 people.
36?
Yeah, we got 16 babies. 15 babies.
15 babies?
Yes.
And you hope to stay in Hong Kong?
Any place.
Or do you want to go to, which country would you like to go to?
If my family want to go to the United States because I have too many people, my uncle, my brother, and many people. I got a lot of address in the United States.
Yeah. So now you are very happy?
Yes, I have.
Thank you very much.
For the boat people who do finally make it to the harbour at Hong Kong, it may be the start of a new life, but it's also the beginning of long and expensive wrangles between ship owners, immigration officials and governments. Records must be kept so that some sort of temporary accommodation can be found and eventually homes for them somewhere in the world. There are such large numbers to deal with that it means hours of waiting before they can be attended to. Since the beginning of this year, Hong Kong's Vietnamese refugee population has swollen to an estimated 40,000. That's 5 times the number in January. There's no sign of it easing off either, because there are up to 1.5 million overseas Chinese still in Vietnam. They could be forced out to look for new homes during the next few months. The hardships the refugees have had to endure in order to leave Vietnam is a clear indication that their plight there was a desperate one.
We had a very long journey over 35 days, and I had no money, but I have to borrow money from my relatives and friends. $3,500. I plan to go to some free country and work and make money and pay back to those who lend me the money. My only wish is to reach America.
For Hong Kong, a familiar sight, but one which presents a serious problem: accommodation. The camps are already crowded, not just with Vietnamese, but with refugees who've come across the border from China itself. Because there are potentially far more of them, the influx of Chinese refugees to Hong Kong is an even bigger problem than the Vietnamese boat people. Since the beginning of the year, 47,000 Chinese have been granted exit permits as a result of China's liberalization program. This relaxation of immigration rules has added enormously to Hong Kong's refugee population. When Chinese arrive at the border with an exit permit to the colony, Hong Kong has no choice but to accept them, because they have the status of legal immigrants. The Hong Kong government's only hope is that they can slow down the tide of Chinese arrivals. Any progress in that direction, though, is dependent on Peking's willingness to introduce tighter control on legal immigration. At the border between the two countries, Hong Kong officials rigorously check the exit permits to make sure there are no illegals among the immigrants. Police and troops have picked up and repatriated 26,000 Chinese trying to cross the border illegally. They estimate that for every illegal who's captured, 2 or 3 enter undetected. Most of the Chinese illegals come across the water to Hong Kong. This route's been much easier since the Chinese troops were transferred from the border here to fight in the month-long war with Vietnam. It's estimated that as many as 100,000 Chinese refugees have crossed the water since January this year. However, all 4 British battalions in Hong Kong have now been deployed to patrol the coast, thus freeing the hands of the Marine Police to deal with the flood of refugees from Vietnam. Some of the illegals never make it. 200 bodies have been recovered this year. Most have died of exhaustion, others have been torn to bits by sharks. Whatever it may feel about individual tragedies, the Hong Kong government cannot afford to give official sympathy to those who are caught trying to enter the colony. They have no alternative but to repatriate them. Those who have been caught making the swim a second time face a 6-month prison sentence when they are repatriated. In spite of this, some are still grimly determined to escape again. Apart from increasing border patrols, the colony is spending 14 million Hong Kong dollars on strengthening border fences. But they admit it would take something on the scale of the Berlin Wall to keep these people out. Many of the captured illegal Chinese emigrants say they have no faith in the promise of higher living standards in China once its modernization program succeeds. They say they've heard it all before and nothing ever happens. But Hong Kong's in no position to open its doors to them.
Come on, okay.
Hong Kong was the most crowded piece of territory on Earth long before all its problems were compounded by the refugee crisis. The task of housing its own 5 million population is daunting enough, especially in the last few years. Stung by criticism, mainly from the West, Hong Kong's been struggling not merely to cope, but to actually improve living and working conditions in the colony. Every single refugee, whether from China or Vietnam, merely adds to the problem. The grand total of legal and illegal immigrants has already topped 200,000 this year. And the Hong Kong government is insisting that it simply cannot cope with an influx on this scale. Hong Kong's new secretary, Sir Jack Cater, has no doubts about how serious the problem now is.
It's a very serious problem indeed. And when you talk of refugees, I assume you are talking about Vietnamese refugees. But you have to see this against the backdrop of a very large number of immigrants, both legal and illegal, coming here from China. All told, immigrants from China, refugees from Vietnam, roughly 1,500 a day. That's 500,000 a year at that rate as far as Hong Kong is concerned. A rate which we couldn't possibly sustain for very long.
In real terms, what does that mean for economic and social progress in Hong Kong?
Oh, very considerable. It's difficult to give you exact figures on this, but it means that our housing programs, our medical programs, our education programs, of which I think we were justly proud, have been substantially downgraded. And it must mean, too, that the standards of living of Hong Kong people are being seriously affected as we sit here at this moment.
An ocean-going British freighter in Hong Kong harbour. It's carrying an extra human cargo. Sabonga stopped in the South China Sea to assist 2 boatloads from Vietnam who were desperately short of food and water. Hong Kong was their goal, but without the Sabonga's help, they would probably never have made it. All were taken on board, 1,003 of them, but days passed before they were given permission to come ashore. The British government finally agreed to accept them all, following a long tradition of giving sanctuary to anyone picked up on the high seas by a British ship. The new Conservative government, though, says there can be no guarantee of this in the future because of the seemingly endless exodus of boat people across the South China Sea. These, then, are the lucky ones, some looking apprehensive, but most of them happy. They've not only made it to safety, but they are now sure of the chance to make a new life in the West without months or years of delay. And that makes everything bearable, even the indignity of having their luggage rummaged through by immigration officials and then unceremoniously fumigated. The first sights and smells of the life they've heard about. Life that's not theirs necessarily by choice, but one they are willing to embrace after their experience in the new Vietnam. The next part of the journey, a bus ride through the narrow Hong Kong streets, which the immigration laws will prevent them from strolling down during their brief stay here. Their stay is a short one before the airlift to Britain, but they have to be given accommodation in the meantime, and with the present situation it proved a major problem. Room was finally found in a vacated girls' remand home, but they were packed in at more than 35 to a dormitory. Severe overcrowding is inevitable in the prevailing circumstances. Another desperate measure by the Hong Kong government has been to take a 2-year lease on a 23-story factory block in one of the new towns. It's calculated that there'll be room for 16,000 refugees in the building, the population of a small town. Controlling the immigrants from China is something that can only be done by negotiations with Peking. As far as the boat people are concerned, Hong Kong officials have accused the Vietnamese government of being involved in the deliberate cold-blooded trafficking in refugees. Payments by boat people, they say, now constitute one of Vietnam's chief sources of income. There's little chance of a dialogue with Hanoi, so what happens now? Sir Jack Cater again.
What must happen, and especially as far as the Vietnamese refugees are concerned, is that the world must begin to realize how serious this problem is. The Vietnamese government is embarked on a planned program of exporting 1 million people. Their intentions are, of course, to make life unhappy and so unbearable for the Chinese, the ethnic Chinese there. They want to leave. We hear that up to a half of those leaving Vietnam at the moment die at sea. And I just can't believe that the rest of the world understands or appreciates this problem. We appreciate it here because we see them. We see the results of these poor, wretched people coming here, escaping from ghastly conditions in Vietnam.
What happened?
This is Hong Kong's crisis. It's also Southeast Asia's crisis, but it's becoming so immense that action's needed on an international, a worldwide scale. And so far, in spite of United Nations appeals, such action has not been forthcoming. For the Hong Kong refugees, apart from the minority of lucky ones, it means a future of uncertainty and discomfort in the most overcrowded place on earth.